The first thing Nathaniel Kingsley noticed was not that his fiancée was gone, but that the ring she left behind was still warm from her hand. It sat on a folded square of white silk in the private dressing room of the Astoria Grand, beneath a chandelier so bright it made the diamond look almost cruel. Outside the double doors, 400 guests waited in a ballroom filled with champagne towers, white orchids, polished cameras, and the kind of low, expensive music that made a lie sound elegant. Wall Street partners, family attorneys, society columnists, and half of New York's financial elite had gathered to witness the moment Nate Kingsley would finally present Harper Reed as his future wife. The announcement was supposed to quiet the board, stabilize Kingsley Capital Group, and prove that the 36-year-old billionaire chief executive officer had not become the cold, isolated man the press had spent months describing. But Harper was not in the ballroom. She was not in the dressing room. She was not answering her phone. Nate stood in the doorway, one hand still on the brass handle, his black tuxedo flawless, his dark blonde hair neatly combed, his blue-gray eyes fixed on the empty chair in front of the mirror. A makeup brush lay abandoned beside a glass of untouched water. Her engagement dress, pale ivory and simple compared to the gowns his public relations team had suggested, hung from the wardrobe door like a question no one wanted to ask. On the vanity, beside the ring, was a sealed envelope with his name written in Harper's careful handwriting. Not Nathaniel. Not Mr. Kingsley. Nate. That small mercy almost hurt worse than the silence. Behind him, his assistant whispered, "Sir, the guests are asking if there is a delay." Nate did not answer. He stepped inside slowly, as if moving too fast might shatter whatever truth remained in the room. The air still carried the faint scent of Harper's lavender soap, the same quiet scent that had begun appearing in the penthouse 3 months ago, softening rooms that had always felt made of glass and contracts. He picked up the envelope. The paper trembled once between his fingers, though his face did not move. Kingsley's did not fall apart in public. His father had taught him that before he taught him how to ride a bicycle. Pain was private. Image was currency. Weakness was something competitors used. Nate broke the seal. Inside was one sheet, folded once. Only 2 lines. Nate, if I stay, they win. If I run, you might finally look at the evidence. For a moment, the words made no sense. They were too small for the disaster they carried. He read them again, then a third time, each word landing heavier. Evidence. Run. They. His jaw tightened. The first explanation was the easiest one. She had panicked. She had taken the money to save Maple Street Library and decided the rest was too much. Or worse, she had played the part of the humble community worker long enough to get what she wanted, then walked away before the vows, before the cameras, before anyone could ask what a woman from Queens was doing beside one of the richest men in Manhattan. That was the version his pride reached for first, because pride always prefers anger to grief. But something stopped him. Harper had not taken the ring. She had not taken the dress. She had not taken the diamond bracelet his team had sent that morning, and she had refused to wear because, as she had said softly, "I do not want the children at the library seeing me look like someone else." She had left everything expensive behind. She had left only a warning. The door opened behind him, and Victor Hale stepped in with the polished concern of a man who had practiced sympathy in mirrors. Victor was Kingsley Capital's chief financial officer, gray-suited, silver-haired, calm as a locked vault. He took in the room quickly, the dress, the ring, the envelope, Nate's expression. "I heard there was a problem," Victor said. Nate folded the letter once and held it at his side. "Harper is gone." Victor exhaled, measured and quiet. "I am sorry." The words were correct. The tone was correct. Everything about Victor was correct. Too correct. Did she say why? Nate looked down at the ring again. She left a note. Victor's eyes moved, not to Nate's face, but to the paper in his hand. Just for half a second. What did it say? "Nothing that concerns you." A small pause followed. Not long enough for anyone else to notice. Long enough for Nate. Victor lowered his voice. "Nathaniel, I know this is painful, but we have to think clearly. The board is already nervous. A public disappearance on the night of the engagement announcement could be damaging. If she had doubts, she should have spoken to you. If she took advantage of the situation," he let the sentence fade, allowing Nate's wounded mind to finish it for him. "She played you." Nate turned toward him slowly. "Say what you came here to say, Victor." Victor's face softened into something almost fatherly. "She played you." The words entered the room like cold air. For a second, Nate almost believed them because they fit the old scar so perfectly. Years of betrayal in business. False loyalty. Signed agreements broken with smiles. People who loved his name more than they could ever love the man behind it. Harper knew that. She knew he did not trust easily. She also knew paper mattered to him, because once, late at night in the penthouse, she had told him, "People lie when they are afraid. Paper usually waits." Paper. Evidence. Nate looked again at the letter in his hand. Victor stepped closer. "We should control the story before the press does. I can prepare a statement. Personal emergency. Mutual respect. Temporary postponement. You are moving quickly. That is my job." "No," Nate said quietly. "Your job is numbers." Victor's expression did not change, but his eyes did. The ballroom music swelled faintly beyond the walls, elegant and distant, while guests waited for a love story that had already turned into a question. Nate picked up the ring from the white silk. It was warm no longer. He closed his fist around it and looked at Harper's empty chair, at the untouched water glass, at the dress she had chosen because it still looked like her. Then he slipped her letter into the inside pocket of his tuxedo, directly over his heart. "Tell the guests there is a delay," he said. Victor frowned. "Nathaniel, delay will only invite speculation." Nate finally looked at him fully. "Then let them speculate." For the first time that evening, Victor Hale had no prepared answer. Nate walked past him into the hallway, every step calm. every thought sharpened by the same question beating beneath his ribs. If Harper Reed had truly run from him, why had she left behind the one thing that could make him follow the trail? 3 months before the empty dressing room and the ring left on white silk, Harper Reed stood under the cracked green awning of Maple Street Library with rain dripping from her umbrella and a final notice folded in her coat pocket. The building behind her was small, old, and stubborn, squeezed between a closed laundromat and a corner grocery in Queens, its brick walls darkened by years of winter storms and summer heat. To most people passing by, it looked like a place the city had forgotten. To Harper, it was her mother's voice in which shelves and children's drawings, in donated paperbacks, in the soft scratch of pencils during after-school tutoring, in the smell of dust, crayons, and instant cocoa on cold afternoons. Her mother had opened Maple Street Library with 2 folding tables and a belief so fierce it became a roof over dozens of children who had nowhere quiet to study. Now that roof leaked. The heating system failed twice a week. The property taxes were late. A developer had offered to buy the building and turn it into luxury storage units for people who owned apartments too expensive to have clutter. Harper had refused twice. The third offer came with legal pressure, bank deadlines, and the kind of language that made loss sound professional. That morning, she had been sorting donated books when Victor Hale called. His voice was smooth, polite, and impossible to read. Miss Reed, Kingsley Capital may be interested in a community preservation partnership. Mr. Kingsley would like to meet you. Harper almost laughed into the phone, not because it was funny, but because impossible things sometimes arrive dressed as courtesy. By 4 o'clock, she was standing in the lobby of Kingsley Tower, holding the same worn leather bag she carried to grocery stores and parent meetings, trying not to stare at the marble floors or the ceiling that seemed higher than the library's entire building. Security checked her. Identification. A receptionist offered sparkling water. Harper asked for regular water and immediately wished she had not, because the woman's smile shifted by 1 careful inch. The elevator carried her to the 68th floor without a sound. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world made of glass, steel, and quiet wealth. Nathaniel Kingsley waited in a conference room overlooking Manhattan. He was 36, white, composed, and almost unervingly still, wearing a dark suit that seemed built for decisions other people would have to survive. His blue-gray eyes moved to her face, then to the folder in her hand, then back again. He did not waste time. Miss Reed, thank you for coming. Your chief financial officer said this was about Maple Street Library. It is. Nate gestured to the chair across from him. On the table lay 2 folders, one with the library's address, one with the Kingsley family seal embossed on heavy paper. Harper sat, but she kept her bag on her lap like armor. Nate opened the first folder. Your building is 90 days from legal transfer if the debt is not resolved. Your current balance, including penalties and emergency maintenance liens, is $372,000. Harper's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. I know the number. I assumed you did. Then you also know that number is not the value of the place. Nate looked up. Something flickered in his expression, not warmth, not yet, but attention. No, it is not. The answer made her pause. She had expected a man like him to speak in figures, not acknowledge what figures missed. Why am I here, Mr. Kingsley? He closed the folder and folded his hands. Because I can protect the library, buy the property from the bank, fund repairs, and place the building under a non-profit trust so it cannot be sold to a developer. Harper stared at him. For one dangerous second, hope rose so quickly it almost hurt. Then she remembered the world. And what do you want? Nate did not look away. A fiancée. The rain tapped against the windows behind him, high above the city, but inside the room, everything went silent. Harper blinked once. I beg your pardon. A public engagement. 6 months. Legal boundaries. Separate rooms. No personal expectations. At the end, we end the arrangement privately and respectfully. Harper slowly set her bag on the floor. You are asking me to pretend to marry you. I am asking you to stand beside me during a corporate transition. That is not the same thing. To the board, it is close enough. His voice remained calm, but there was tension beneath it. My father's estate documents include a household stability provision tied to family voting authority. It is old, intrusive, and ridiculous, but it exists. If I appear unstable before the next shareholder vote, Victor and several directors can challenge my control. A stable engagement buys time. Harper almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. And I am stable because I am poor? Nate's jaw tightened. You are stable because you have no scandals, no political ties, no connection to my competitors, and a public record of community work. And because desperation makes people easier to negotiate with. This time, he was silent. Harper stood. My mother did not build a library so her daughter could become someone's corporate accessory. Nate rose too, but he did not move closer. I am not offering to buy you, Miss Reed. It sounds very expensive for something that is not a purchase. He accepted the hit without flinching. The money would never go to you unless you wanted compensation. I do not. Then it goes directly to the library trust. Harper looked at him then, really looked, and saw something she had not expected. He was not comfortable. Powerful, yes. Controlled, yes. But not comfortable. It was as if he hated the offer nearly as much as she did, and needed it anyway. Why did your chief financial officer choose me? She asked. Nate's eyes narrowed slightly at the question. Victor found your file through our community outreach review. Did he? You sound doubtful. Men who sound too helpful usually know where the trap is. That earned the smallest shift in Nate's expression, almost respect. Harper picked up the folder and opened it. Photographs of Maple Street Library were inside. The children's reading corner, the broken heater, the faded mural her mother had painted by hand. Her anger softened into something more painful. If she walked away, she kept her pride. If she stayed, She might keep the doors open for every child who came there after school because home was crowded, loud, or cold. If I even consider this, she said, the library goes into a protected trust before any public announcement. Agreed. I keep my own lawyer. Agreed. No one rewrites my life story to make me look more acceptable. Agreed. And if anyone at your company treats me like I should be grateful to be looked at by rich people, I walk. Nate paused, then nodded. Agreed. Harper reached for the silver pen, but did not sign. I also write things down. Meetings. Names. Details. It is a habit. Why tell me that? She looked toward the rain-streaked glass, then back at him. Because people lie. Paper usually waits. Nate studied her for a long moment, as if that sentence had placed something unfamiliar between them. Neither of them noticed Victor Hale outside the conference room, watching through the narrow gap beside the door, his phone already in his hand, his expression calm with the satisfaction of a man who had just found the perfect matchstick for a fire he planned to blame on someone else. By the end of the first week, Harper Reed had learned that wealth did not simply change the rooms around a person. It changed the way people expected her to breathe inside them. Nate Kingsley's penthouse overlooked Central Park from so high above the city that the trees looked like a dark green carpet laid between towers, beautiful and distant, as if ordinary life had been flattened into scenery. The apartment was all quiet marble, glass walls, black walnut shelves, and pale furniture no one seemed meant to touch. Harper's suite had a bed larger than the reading corner at Maple Street Library, a private bath lined with stone, and a closet already filled with clothes chosen by people who had never met her. The first night, she stood in the doorway for nearly a minute with her small suitcase in one hand, unable to step forward. Her entire life fit inside that suitcase. This room looked as if it had been designed for someone who owned silence. On the desk lay the contract, the engagement schedule, a security card, and a small stack of cream stationery she had brought from the library. She touched the stationery first. Not the card. Not the schedule. Paper she understood. Paper waited. Nate knocked once from the hallway. May I come in? Harper turned. He was still in his suit, tie loosened slightly, his expression controlled in the way rich men used control as a second skin. It is your apartment, she said. It is your room. The answer surprised her. It also made her uncomfortable, because kindness inside a contract was harder to defend against than arrogance. Nate stepped only as far as the doorway. The public relations team starts tomorrow at 9. They will review interview responses, wardrobe, seating arrangements, and what they call couple language. Harper lifted an eyebrow. Couple language? Apparently we have to learn how to look natural while being evaluated by strangers. That sounds very natural. A faint smile touched his face before he put it away. You can refuse anything that feels invasive. Harper looked around the room. Mr. Kingsley, this entire situation is invasive. He accepted that with a small nod. Nate, he said after a beat. If we are doing this, you can call me Nate. Harper studied him. In public. In private too. She did not answer right away. Names were dangerous. Names made arrangements feel human. Good night, Nate, she said at last. The next morning, 3 stylists, 2 public relations consultants, and a posture coach arrived before Harper had finished her coffee. They spoke in cheerful, efficient phrases that made every correction sound like a gift. Softer smile. Slower walk. Less defensive with your hands. Do not say struggling neighborhood. Say underserved community. Do not mention overdue taxes unless asked directly. Keep your answers warm, brief, grateful. Harper sat under bright lights while a woman adjusted her hair, and another held 2 dresses against her shoulders as if testing whether silk could erase queens from her bones. The goal, one consultant named Tessa said, is to help people see why Mr. Kingsley chose you. Harper looked at her reflection in the mirror. Maybe people should ask why I chose him. The room went quiet. From the doorway, Nate looked up from his phone. Tessa laughed lightly, but it cracked at the edges. Of course, that is also part of the narrative. I am not a narrative, Harper said. I am a person who runs a library. Nate watched her in the mirror. He had expected discomfort, maybe embarrassment. He had not expected fire wrapped in restraint. He had chosen Harper because Victor had made her sound simple. Clean background, sympathetic public image, low risk. But there was nothing simple about the way she held her dignity in a room designed to take ownership of it. By noon, they were rehearsing their first televised charity appearance. Tessa held cue cards while Nate and Harper sat on a cream sofa beneath soft studio lights. How did you two connect? Tessa asked. Nate answered first. Through our shared interest in community preservation. Harper turned to him. That sounds like a brochure, Learn to Speak. One of the stylists covered a laugh with a cough. Nate looked at Harper. What would you say? Harper faced the pretend camera. We met because Maple Street Library needed help, and Mr. Kingsley had the power to help. I did not trust him at first. I am still deciding how much to trust him now. But I know he listened when I told him the library was not for sale. Silence followed. Tessa lowered the cue card. That is honest. Yes, Harper said. That is usually what happens when people ask questions. Nate leaned back slightly, but his eyes had changed. Not amused. Not offended. Interested. Later that evening, the engagement announcement went live. Within minutes, Harper's face appeared on financial sites, society feeds, and gossip accounts. Some called her refreshing. Some called her lucky. Others were sharper. Charity Cinderella. Queen's girl wins Billionaire lottery. Poor librarian lands Manhattan prince. Harper stood alone in the penthouse kitchen, reading until the words blurred into one cold message. They did not need to know her to decide what she wanted. Nate entered quietly and saw the phone in her hand. Do not read comments, he said. Do wealthy people come with a manual of impossible advice? Usually several. She almost smiled, then did not. They think I am here for your money. Nate placed a glass of water near her, careful not to touch her hand. People think whatever protects them from questioning themselves. Harper looked at him. And what do you think? He had answered billion-dollar questions faster than that. This one held him still. I think you are here because you love a building full of children more than you hate being misunderstood. Something softened in her face before she turned away. That is dangerously close to seeing me. Nate's voice lowered. Would that be so terrible? Harper did not answer. She walked to her room, shut the door gently, and sat at the desk beneath the wide window. On the first sheet of cream stationery, she wrote the date, then the details of the day. Tessa corrected the word poor. Victor changed the Tuesday board lunch to Wednesday. Nate noticed I was not drinking water. Comments online called me Charity Cinderella. Nate said, I love the library more than I hate being misunderstood. Her pen paused over the last line. Then she added, I need to remember that he can be kind without knowing what kindness costs. Across the city, Victor Hale sat alone in his office, scrolling through the same engagement coverage. He paused on a photograph of Nate watching Harper during rehearsal, his expression unguarded for one dangerous second. Victor enlarged the image, studying it carefully. Harper was supposed to be useful, temporary, controllable. Instead, she had made Nathaniel Kingsley look less like a lonely emperor and more like a man people might follow without fear. Victor turned off the screen, opened a locked drawer, and removed a folder already labeled with Harper Reed's name. Too much dignity, he murmured to the empty room. That will have to be corrected. The night Nate Kingsley first understood why Harper Reed would never belong to anyone's purchase came with thunder over Queens and rain running through the ceiling of Maple Street Library in 3 separate places. She was supposed to be at a private dinner in Midtown, seated beside him beneath soft lights while donors and bored allies watched them perform a calm, believable engagement. Tessa had planned the seating chart. Victor had approved the guest list. Nate had adjusted his schedule down to the minute. But at 7:12, Harper sent one message. The library is flooding near the children's corner. I cannot leave. By 7:15, Victor was already standing in Nate's office with concern arranged perfectly across his face. This is exactly the problem, Victor said, voice low and careful. She does not understand the stakes. One missed dinner becomes a question. Questions become doubt. Doubt reaches the board. Nate stared at the rain streaking down the glass wall of Kingsley Tower. Below, Manhattan traffic glowed red and white through the storm. It is a leak, Victor. It is a pattern. One night is not a pattern. Victor stepped closer. Nathaniel, you are letting sentiment blur judgment. The word sentiment struck something in Nate, because he had heard it all his life, always spoken like a disease. His father had called mercy sentiment. His attorneys called hesitation sentiment. His competitors called trust sentiment. Nate reached for his coat. Then I should go see the problem myself. Victor's eyes narrowed almost invisibly. That may not be wise. Nate paused at the door. Neither is taking advice from a man who sounds disappointed when a children's library survives the rain. 30 minutes later, Nate stepped out of a black car onto Maple Street with his polished shoes meeting a curbside puddle deep enough to ruin them. The library's green awning snapped in the wind. Warm yellow lights spilled from the front windows, trembling each time lightning flashed somewhere beyond the roofs. Inside, the lobby smelled of wet wool, old paper, instant cocoa, and the metallic tap of water dripping into plastic buckets. The luxury of his world had always hidden chaos behind staff, systems, and money. Here, chaos stood in the open, and Harper stood in the middle of it with her sleeves pushed up, moving as if love itself had a checklist. She wore jeans, sneakers, and an Old Navy sweatshirt with Maple Street Library printed across the front in cracked white letters. Her chestnut hair was twisted messily behind her head. A strip of painter's tape clung to her sleeve. She was kneeling beside a low bookshelf, lifting books away from a spreading patch of water while 2 children passed her dry towels like nurses in a tiny, serious hospital. Move the picture books first, Harper said gently. The ones with the soft pages. Miguel, thank you. Sophie, please do not stand on that chair unless you want me to become 80 years old tonight. A little girl giggled. Nate stood unnoticed for a moment, rain on his overcoat, watching a world where Harper was not pretending. No stylist corrected her hands. No consultant softened her words. No camera waited to capture her kindness and package it for investors. She saw him only when he stepped farther inside. Her expression shifted from surprise to worry to the faintest flash of irritation. You were supposed to be at dinner. So are you. I had a leak. I noticed. She glanced at his shoes. You also had better judgment before you stepped in that puddle. He looked down. The shoes were ruined. Somehow, he could not make himself care. What do you need? The question disarmed her. She had expected frustration, maybe a lecture about image and timing. For a second, she looked almost lost. Then another drop hit the floor beside the children's corner, and Harper became motion again. Move that table away from the wall. The towels are in the supply closet. If you can carry boxes, start with the donations near the window. Nate removed his overcoat and suit jacket, rolled his sleeves, and did as he was told. He carried boxes of donated books to the back room. He dragged a folding table 6 feet across the floor. He held a flashlight while Harper climbed a small step ladder and taped plastic sheeting above the worst leak. His hands, used to signing acquisitions and shaking hands with senators, fumbled with soggy cardboard and rusted shelf brackets. But no one laughed except a boy named Miguel, who looked at Nate's crooked stack of books and said, "You are not very good at libraries." Nate considered that with full seriousness. I am beginning to suspect that. Harper heard him and smiled before she could stop herself. It was brief, tired, and real. Later, when the storm softened from a roar to steady rain, the children gathered in the reading corner with blankets while Harper opened a worn copy of The Secret Garden. She read aloud in a voice that changed shape for every character. Nate stood near the doorway, holding 2 mugs of cocoa he had been instructed not to spill. A small boy on the floor shivered under a thin blanket, trying to pretend he was not cold. Nate noticed. Without asking anyone to look, he picked up his expensive overcoat from the chair and draped it gently around the child's shoulders. The coat swallowed him almost completely. The boy touched the dark fabric with wide eyes. Is this rich person fabric? Nate crouched beside him. Tonight it is library fabric. Across the room, Harper stopped reading for half a sentence. Her eyes found Nate over the top of the book, and something between them changed so quietly that no one else could have named it. Not romance, not yet. Something more dangerous to the contract. Recognition. After the children were picked up and the last bucket was emptied, Harper and Nate sat on the floor in the back aisle, surrounded by rescued books stacked like small towers. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The heater clicked, failed, then started again with a tired hum. Harper handed Nate a towel for his sleeves. You missed your important dinner. So did you. Mine had a better excuse. Mine had better company. She looked at him, uncertain whether he meant it. Nate looked at the shelves, the peeling labels, the handmade signs, the photograph of Harper's mother taped beside the front desk. My father believed buildings were only valuable if they could be leveraged. Harper's voice softened. And what do you believe? He did not answer quickly. For once, he did not have a prepared sentence. I think I have spent my life owning rooms I never understood. Harper let that sit between them. This room understands you better now. It saw you ruin expensive shoes for picture books. A laugh escaped him, low and surprised. She smiled too, and for a moment the arrangement between them seemed far away, trapped in some other city where people measured worth by headlines and votes. But outside, across the street beneath the shadow of a closed laundromat, a man sat inside a parked car with a camera lens lowered from the rain-streaked window. By midnight, the photograph of Nate placing his coat around the child was already on Victor Hale's private phone, and Victor knew with absolute certainty that Harper Reed had become more dangerous than any document he could forge. Victor Hale did not attack trust with accusations at first. He attacked it with timing. The morning after the storm at Maple Street Library, Nate Kingsley arrived at Kingsley Tower with water-damaged shoes in a paper bag, 2 missed calls from Victor, and the strange, quiet warmth of Harper's smile still living somewhere behind his ribs. He had slept less than 4 hours, but for the first time in months, exhaustion did not feel like a punishment. It felt earned. In the lobby, employees looked at him differently, not with fear exactly, but with curiosity. Someone had seen the photograph. By 8:30, half the company had seen it. The Billionaire chief executive officer in a rolled-up dress shirt, kneeling beside a child wrapped in his overcoat, surrounded by shelves of children's books and buckets catching rainwater. It was not scandalous. It was worse for Victor. It was human. Nate was in his office reviewing the schedule for the engagement announcement when Victor entered with a tablet under one arm and a folder in his hand. He did not mention the photograph right away. Men like Victor knew that concern worked best when it arrived wearing patience. The board likes the image, Victor said, setting the tablet on Nate's desk. At least publicly. Privately, some directors are asking whether Miss Reed has too much influence over your decisions. Nate looked up. She canceled a dinner because a library was flooding. And you followed her. Yes. Victor gave a small nod, as if confirming a diagnosis. That is what worries them. Nate leaned back, his expression cooling. Them, or you? Victor smiled faintly. My job is to worry before problems become headlines. He opened the folder. Which brings me to this. Inside were printed emails, bank records, and a compliance summary stamped confidential. Nate read the first page, then the second. His face did not change, but the room seemed to narrow around him. The documents suggested Harper had received a payment from a consulting firm connected to a rival investment group. $10,000. Then another 5. There were login records tied to her security badge, showing late-night access to internal budget files. There was even an email that appeared to mention board vulnerability and engagement leverage. Nate held the page still, but something old and cold woke inside him. He had seen betrayal on paper before. It always looked clean. Neat columns, dates, signatures, proof pretending not to enjoy itself. Victor spoke gently. I did not want to believe it either. Nate looked at him. Did you? No, the answer came too fast. Victor corrected himself with a sigh. I hoped I was wrong. But after last night, after seeing how much access she has to you, to your residence, to your schedule, we would be irresponsible not to examine this. Nate turned back to the file. Harper's face rose in his mind, wet hair loose from the storm, tape stuck to her sleeve, telling him that paper usually waits. Now paper had arrived, and it was accusing her. Who else has this? Nate asked. Compliance. Legal. Not the full board. Not yet. Give it to Maya Collins. Victor's eyes tightened almost imperceptibly. Maya was young, quiet, and inconveniently honest. Maya is thorough, but this may require senior review. Give it to Maya. Victor lowered his head. Of course. Across town, Harper was learning that Victor's second blade had her name written on it. She was in the back office of Maple Street Library, sorting receipts from the emergency repairs, when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. No greeting. No explanation. Only an audio file. She stared at it for several seconds. The library was quiet around her. Rain still tapped softly at the windows, though the storm had passed. In the reading room, Miguel and Sophie argued in whispers over a board game. Harper should have deleted the file. Instead, she pressed play. Nate's voice filled the small office, low and controlled. She was never meant to matter after the vote. A second voice, Victor's, asked, and after the engagement stabilizes things? Nate answered, she goes back to the library. I go back to my life. The recording ended. Harper did not move. The old radiator clicked beneath the window. Someone laughed in the hallway. A stack of donated books leaned against her desk, tied with twine. She played the file again, because pain has a terrible habit of asking for proof even when proof is what hurt it. The words remained. She was never meant to matter. She pressed the phone face down on the desk. Her first thought was practical. Of course. It was a contract. Of course he had an end date. Of course a man like Nate Kingsley did not rearrange his life around a librarian from Queens. Her second thought was not practical at all. It was him placing his coat around a cold child and calling it library fabric. It was him laughing on the floor between rescued books. It was the way he had looked at her when she said the room understood him better now. Those memories made the recording crueler because they gave her heart something to compare it to. At the penthouse that evening, silence greeted them before either spoke. Harper arrived first, carrying her notebook and a canvas tote of library receipts. Nate came in 20 minutes later, the compliance folder tucked under his arm. They met in the living room, with Central Park dark beyond the glass and the city lights floating like distant witnesses. Harper saw the folder. Nate saw the stiffness in her face. Both understood that something had entered the room before them. "We need to talk," Nate said. Harper's mouth curved, but it was not a smile. "That sounds like something people say after they have already decided what they think." He set the folder on the table. "There are documents I need verified." "About me?" He paused. "Too long." Harper nodded once, as if the pause had signed his name. "You received something." Nate's eyes sharpened. "What did you receive?" She pulled out her phone and placed it on the table. "Your honesty, apparently." The audio played between them, small speakers filling the vast room with the sentence Victor had built from pieces. She was never meant to matter after the vote. Nate's expression shifted instantly, not with guilt, but with confusion so clean that Harper almost wanted to believe it. "I never said that. Not to me. Not to anyone." "Then why does it sound like you?" His voice lowered. "Because someone wants it to." Harper looked at the folder. "And those papers? Do they want something too?" Nate did not answer fast enough. The hurt in her eyes deepened, and he hated that his suspicion had arrived dressed as caution. "Harper, I am having them verified." "You are verifying whether I sold you out." "I am verifying whether someone is using your name." "That is not what your face said when I walked in." The room went quiet. He could negotiate with billionaires, silence a board, dismantle a hostile takeover. But he did not know how to undo the look on her face. Harper picked up her phone. "My mother used to say a rich man can afford to wait for the truth because he has already survived the rumor. People like me do not get that luxury." She turned toward the hallway. "Harper." She stopped, but did not face him. "Ask your documents what kind of woman I am, Nate. They seem to have your attention." Then she walked away. Much later, after the penthouse had gone still, Harper sat at the desk in her suite and opened her notebook with shaking hands. She wrote down everything. The unknown number, the audio file, Victor's changed schedule, Nate's folder, the exact time, the exact words. Her tears fell once on the page, blurring only the corner. She wiped them away and kept writing. Across the city, Maya Collins opened the file Victor had sent her and noticed something no senior executive had bothered to check. The bank account under Harper Reed's name had been created with a mailing address in Delaware, linked to a dormant vendor that had billed Kingsley Capital 6 times under Victor Hale's approval code. The next morning, Harper Reed woke before sunrise with her notebook open beside her and the city still blue beyond the penthouse windows. She had not slept so much as waited for the night to end. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the recording again, Nate's voice saying she was never meant to matter, then saw his face in the living room, confused and wounded in a way no guilty man could fake that perfectly. The two truths stood on opposite sides of her mind, refusing to touch. On the desk, her notes from the past weeks covered 3 pages. Victor changing meetings without explanation, Victor requesting access to engagement vendor budgets, Victor asking too many questions about Maple Street library donors, Victor watching her whenever Nate looked away. Harper underlined his name once, then twice. By 7, she had made a decision. If paper waited, then she would go where paper lived. Kingsley Tower felt different that morning. The lobby was still polished, the marble still bright, the receptionist still smiling with professional distance, but Harper moved through it with new eyes. Every camera in the ceiling seemed less like security and more like a witness someone else controlled. She wore a cream blouse under a simple navy coat, her engagement ring still on her finger because taking it off too early would become a signal. Her heart beat hard as she stepped into the elevator, but her face remained calm. Poor girls learned early that panic made people comfortable ignoring them. Calm made them listen, or at least underestimate you. She had told the front desk she needed to retrieve her notebook from Nate's private conference room before the engagement announcement rehearsal. It was partly true. The notebook was not there, but the truth had become a luxury no one in this building seemed able to afford. On the 68th floor, the executive corridor was unusually quiet. Nate was at an early legal briefing. Victor, according to the schedule, was supposed to be at a breakfast with 2 directors. Harper passed the conference room, then stopped when she heard voices behind the records office door. It was a small room she had never entered, tucked between legal archives and a copy room that smelled faintly of toner. The door was not fully closed. Through the narrow gap, she saw Victor Hale standing beside a young analyst from accounting, his posture calm, his voice low. "Remove the draft references before noon," Victor said. "The final packet only needs the version showing Miss Reed's access." The analyst shifted nervously. "Maya Collins asked for the raw log files." Victor's voice cooled. "Maya Collins asks for many things. She will receive what I authorize." Harper's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. The analyst left by the opposite door, not seeing her. Victor remained inside for another minute, speaking into his phone. "The engagement event will force the issue. Once the documents are public, Nathaniel will either defend her and look compromised, or abandon her and look unstable. Either path gives the board reason to intervene." Harper stopped breathing. There it was. Not suspicion, not misunderstanding. A plan. Victor ended the call and walked out through the rear exit, leaving the front door slightly open. Harper waited until his footsteps disappeared, then slipped inside. The records office was dim, lit only by a desk lamp and the pale glow of a monitor Victor had not locked. Her hands were cold as she approached it. On the screen was a folder named Engagement Risk Review. Inside were files with names that made her stomach drop. Read payment trail, access timeline, rival communication, board emergency recommendation. She clicked the first file. A bank statement opened with her name at the top, but the address was not hers. The second file showed emails she had never written. The third showed late-night badge access to budget folders she had never opened. Then she found the audio folder. Original clips. Cut segments. Final version. Harper covered her mouth with one hand, not because she might scream, but because grief sometimes tried to escape before strategy could stop it. Nate's voice had been stitched together from meetings, interviews, and private discussions. Her humiliation had been engineered syllable by syllable. She pulled a small USB drive from her bag, the one she used for library grant records, and copied everything she could. Her eyes kept jumping to the door. Every second sounded too loud. The computer chimed softly when the transfer completed. She removed the drive and photographed the screen with her phone, file names, timestamps, Victor's approval codes, the modified board packet. Then she saw one more document, buried at the bottom. It was a draft statement prepared for release after the engagement collapse. The statement expressed regret that Nate Kingsley's personal judgment had placed Kingsley Capital at reputational risk. It recommended temporary transfer of operational authority to Victor Hale. Harper stared at it until the words blurred. He did not only want her gone. He wanted Nate broken in public and grateful for the man who would replace him. A sound came from the hallway. Harper closed the files too quickly, grabbed the USB, and turned toward the shelves just as Maya Collins stepped into the doorway. For one terrifying second, neither woman moved. Maya looked at the monitor, then at Harper's face, then quietly reached behind her and closed the door. You found it, Maya whispered. Harper's voice was barely steady. You knew? I suspected. I could not prove it before today. Can you get this to Nate? Maya glanced toward the ceiling camera. Not directly. Victor is filtering his email, his calendar, and probably anyone he thinks is loyal to him. If we move too soon, he buries this and says you fabricated it. Harper looked at the USB in her palm. Small, ordinary, heavy with the truth. Then I need to put it somewhere Nate will find only after Victor thinks I am gone. Maya frowned. Gone. Harper's face changed, and with that change came pain, so clear Maya almost asked her not to say it. The engagement is tonight. Victor needs a collapse. I will give him one he cannot control. Hours later, Harper returned to the penthouse while Nate was still at Kingsley Tower. She went straight to his study, to the shelf where the old leather book from his father sat untouched between two rows of corporate biographies. Nate had once told her he hated the book because his father had underlined every sentence about power and ignored every sentence about mercy. Harper opened the back cover carefully and slipped the USB inside the loosened spine, then placed a folded letter between the final pages. Her hand lingered there. Please remember what I told you, she whispered to the empty room. People lie. Paper waits. In her suite, the ivory engagement dress hung ready beside the mirror. The ring on her finger caught the afternoon light. Harper removed it slowly, placed it on white silk, and wrote one final note with a hand that did not shake until the last word. Nate, if I stay, they win. If I run, you might finally look at the evidence. When she left through the service elevator, she did not look back, because if she saw the life she almost wanted, she might forget that saving him meant letting him believe, for one terrible night, that she had abandoned him. By the time Nate Kingsley returned to the penthouse, the engagement announcement had already collapsed into a public spectacle, and the city had begun writing Harper Reid's story without her permission. Reporters gathered outside the Astoria Grand beneath umbrellas, speaking into cameras with bright voices and hungry eyes. Inside the hotel, white orchids were being removed from the ballroom one arrangement at a time. Champagne glasses stood untouched, and guests whispered as if disappointment were a luxury they had paid to witness. By 10 o'clock, financial news sites called it a personal crisis. By 10:15, gossip pages called Harper a runaway fiancée. By 10:30, someone had posted an old photograph of Maple Street Library with the caption, "Maybe she got what she wanted and left." Nate saw the headline on his phone while the elevator carried him up to the penthouse, and for the first time that night, anger lost its shape and became something quieter, something almost afraid. Harper had left the ring. Harper had left the dress. Harper had left a warning. People who ran with guilt usually carried something with them. Harper had carried nothing but the burden of making him look at the truth. The elevator opened into silence. The penthouse, usually cold and perfect, felt abandoned in a way no empty room had ever felt before. Her shoes were gone from beside the entry bench. Her canvas tote was gone from the kitchen chair. The cream stationery she used at night was no longer stacked on the desk in the East Suite. But the ivory engagement dress still hung beside the mirror, untouched, glowing faintly in the city light like a future that had been paused before it could breathe. On the vanity, the white silk square remained, empty now because Nate still held the ring in his fist. He stood in the doorway of her room and remembered the first night she had entered it with one suitcase and more dignity than everyone on his board combined. He remembered her saying, "People lie. Paper usually waits." The sentence returned with force, not as memory, as instruction. Nate turned and walked to his study. Victor's voice followed him from the dressing room, smooth and certain. "She played you." But Harper's words were in his pocket, pressed over his heart. "If I run, you might finally look at the evidence." The study was dark except for the skyline beyond the glass and the small brass lamp on his desk. Shelves of leather-bound books lined one wall, most of them inherited, few of them loved. His father's old book sat in the center of the highest shelf, exactly where it had always been, untouched because touching it felt like reopening a room Nate had spent years keeping locked. He reached for it slowly. The leather was worn at the spine, dark brown, cracked near the corners. His father had underlined entire passages about power, control, discipline, legacy. Never the passages about mercy. Never the ones about trust. Nate opened the book at random first, and nothing happened. A page about empire. A margin note in his father's hard handwriting. He almost closed it. Then he remembered Harper standing in this study weeks earlier, touching the spine with 2 fingers and saying softly, "One day you should hide something true inside something that hurt you." His breath caught. He turned the book over and ran his thumb along the back cover. The spine shifted. Not much. Just enough. A small black USB drive slid into his palm, followed by a folded letter. For a few seconds, he could not move. The evidence was real. Not a metaphor. Not a guess. Real, small, and warm now from his hand. He opened the letter first. Harper's handwriting was steady, but he could feel the pain beneath every line. "Nate, if you found this, then I was right to believe there was still a part of you that listens before it condemns. Victor built the paper trail against me. The account is not mine. The recording is edited. The vendor files connect to him. He wants you wounded, distracted, and publicly uncertain before the board moves against you. I ran because if I stayed, he would use me as proof. If I disappeared, he would think he had won too early." Nate sat down slowly, the letter held between both hands. He read it again, and the room blurred at the edges, not with tears, not yet, but with the awful pressure of understanding arriving too late. Harper had known he might hate her. She had known the world would insult her. She had known the library could suffer from the scandal. And still she had chosen the path that gave him one chance to see the knife before it reached his back. He inserted the USB into his laptop. Folder after folder opened under the lamp's glow. Bank records, vendor payments, audio files labeled original and final, access logs, screenshots from the records office. Victor's approval codes repeated like fingerprints he had believed no one would check. Nate opened the audio folder and listened as the sentence that had hurt Harper was taken apart into pieces. His words, yes, but stolen from different meetings, cut and stitched into cruelty. He closed his eyes. Not because he could not bear what Victor had done, but because he could not bear that Harper had stood in front of him asking to be believed, and he had answered with verification instead of trust. His phone rang. Maya Collins. Nate answered at once. "Tell me you have seen it," she said, breathless. "I am looking at it now." "Then listen carefully. Victor called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning at the Astoria Grand. He is going to argue that Harper compromised you and that you are no longer fit to lead through the vote." Nate looked at the screen, at Victor's approval code beside the false vendor file. "Where is Harper?" Maya hesitated. "Safe. But she does not want you coming to her out of panic." "This is not panic." "Then what is it?" Nate looked toward the East Suite, at the empty room where Harper had left behind wealth, comfort, and the only future his world had allowed her to claim. His voice lowered. "It is clarity." Maya was silent for one beat. "Bring the USB. Bring the letter. And bring the man who should have trusted her the first time." Nate stood, placing Harper's letter beside the ring on his desk. Outside, Manhattan glittered as if nothing had broken. But inside the study, the story had changed. Harper Reed had not run from his name. She had run into the dark carrying the truth, knowing he might only recognize love after evidence taught him how to look. The next morning, the Astoria Grand looked less like a hotel and more like a stage built for a verdict. The ballroom where Nate and Harper's engagement should have been announced still carried the evidence of celebration. Ivory orchids in tall glass vases, untouched champagne flutes along the side tables, gold chairs arranged in perfect rows, and a polished dance floor reflecting chandeliers that had been meant to soften a love story for cameras. But now a long conference table cut through the center of the room, covered in folders, tablets, water glasses, and the tense hands of board members who had come prepared to discuss leadership failure. Victor Hale stood at the head of the table in a charcoal suit, calm, composed, and almost mournful. He was good at mourning things he had arranged to lose. "I regret the circumstances," Victor said, his voice carrying just enough sorrow to sound responsible. "But Kingsley Capital cannot afford uncertainty. Last night's disappearance raised serious questions about Mr. Kingsley's personal judgment, the integrity of private access, and the potential exposure of confidential materials." Nate stood near the far end of the room, silent, wearing a dark suit instead of the tuxedo from the night before. His face gave nothing away. Inside his jacket, Harper's letter and the USB rested like a pulse. Beside him, Maya Collins kept her laptop closed, her posture straight, her eyes fixed on Victor with the focus of someone who had spent the night building truth into order. Victor opened a folder and slid copies down the table. "The documents before you suggest Miss Reed received payments from an outside consulting firm tied to a rival investment group. We also have access records showing her badge used to view restricted internal files. The optics alone are damaging. If Mr. Kingsley continues to defend her, the board must consider whether emotional involvement has compromised executive judgment." A director near the middle of the table adjusted his glasses. "Are you recommending temporary transfer of authority?" Victor lowered his eyes as if the suggestion pained him. "Only until an independent review is complete. As chief financial officer, I can provide continuity." There it was. Polite, legal, clean. The theft of power wrapped in concern. Nate looked at him across the table. "You rehearsed that." A faint ripple passed through the room. Victor's expression stayed smooth. "I prepared for the company's protection." "No," Nate said. "You prepared for my removal." Before Victor could answer, the ballroom doors opened. Every face turned. Harper Reed walked in wearing a simple navy coat over a cream blouse, her hair tied back, her face pale from a sleepless night, but steady in a way no rumor could touch. She did not wear the engagement ring. She did not look like a woman returning to beg for forgiveness. She looked like someone carrying the one thing the room had forgotten to invite, the truth. A whisper moved among the directors. Victor's hand closed around the edge of his folder. It was small, but Nate saw it. Harper walked to the front of the room and stood beside Nate, leaving a careful space between them. The space hurt him, but he understood it. Trust did not return because evidence arrived. Trust had to be earned after the evidence stopped the bleeding. Victor found his voice first. Miss Reed, this is a confidential board meeting. Harper looked at him. Then perhaps you should not have built it around my name. Maya opened her laptop and connected it to the ballroom screen, the same screen that should have shown engagement portraits. Instead, the first image appeared, a bank account under Harper Reed's name. Victor spoke quickly. That account received funds from a firm connected to our competitor. Maya clicked once. The address field enlarged. The account was opened with a Delaware mailing address Miss Reed has never used. That address belongs to a dormant vendor that billed Kingsley Capital 6 times under Mr. Hale's approval code. The room shifted. Not dramatically, just enough for fear to change owners. Victor gave a short, controlled breath. Approval codes can be routed through departments. This is not proof. Agreed, Maya said. So we kept going. She clicked again. The screen filled with vendor invoices from the engagement event, floral design, media coordination, hotel deposits, security, then a consulting line buried beneath them. Maya highlighted the routing sequence. This vendor received payment from the engagement budget, then transferred funds into the account falsely opened under Miss Reed's name. From there, the payment was presented as evidence against her. A board member leaned forward. Who authorized the vendor? Maya clicked. Victor Hale's digital approval appeared on the screen. Victor's mouth tightened. Digital records can be manipulated. Harper stepped forward. Yes, that is exactly what you counted on. The next file opened, the audio recording. The room heard Nate's voice say, "She was never meant to matter after the vote." Harper did not look at him when the sentence played. Nate felt that as punishment he had earned. Then Maya played the raw clips. Different meetings, different background noise, different days. Words cut apart and stitched together until they became a weapon. The directors listened in growing silence as the lie unmade itself one fragment at a time. Nate finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying through the ballroom. I did say parts of those words. I did not say that sentence. More importantly, I did not trust the woman who gave me every reason to ask before I judged. Harper's eyes lowered for one breath. Victor tried to recover. This is emotional theater. Miss Reed had access. She had motive. She had everything to gain. Harper turned to the board. If I had everything to gain, why did I leave the ring behind? Why did I leave the dress? Why did I leave the event before the announcement could make me socially untouchable? No one answered. She placed the USB on the table. He taught you to look at me. I'm asking you to look at the numbers. Maya displayed the final file, the emergency board recommendation Victor had drafted before Harper disappeared. Its timestamp was from the day before the engagement, before the public scandal existed, before any crisis could justify his plan. The recommendation named Victor as temporary operational authority. The room went still. Nate looked at Victor, and all the years of cold loyalty between them collapsed into one clear truth. You were not responding to a crisis, Nate said. You scheduled one. Victor's face lost color, but his voice remained thinly controlled. I protected this company while you let a librarian distort your judgment. Harper flinched at the word librarian, not because it was an insult, but because Victor made it sound like one. Nate stepped closer to the table. No, she restored it. Eleanor Kingsley, Nate's grandmother, who had sat silent until then, lifted her chin. I move that Victor Hale be suspended immediately pending independent investigation. One director agreed. Then another. Then another. The vote moved around the table quietly, each yes removing another stone from Victor's carefully built wall. No one shouted. No one needed to. Security did not storm the room. 2 hotel officers simply approached and asked Victor to surrender his temporary access badge, while legal counsel prepared the external review. As Victor passed Harper, he stopped just long enough to murmur, "They will still remember that you ran." Harper met his eyes. Good. Then they will also remember why. Victor had no answer to that. When he was escorted out, the ballroom remained caught between 2 stories, the engagement that failed and the truth that survived it. Nate turned to Harper, his face open in a way she had never seen before, stripped of power, pride, and defense. Harper, he said softly, I am so sorry. For a moment, she looked as if those words had reached the part of her that wanted to collapse into relief. Then she looked at the orchids, the board, table, the screen full of evidence, and the man who had finally believed her only after proof had forced the door open. I know, she said, but I cannot let gratitude become another contract. His breath caught. She stepped back, not in anger, but in self-respect. Your company is safe now, Nate. The rest is something you cannot win in a meeting. Then Harper Reed walked out of the Astoria Grand, leaving behind the ring, the scandal, the board, and the billionaire who had finally learned that proving her innocence was not the same as deserving her heart. For 10 days after Harper Reed walked out of the Astoria Grand, Nate Kingsley did not try to win her back with the things his world had taught him to use. He did not send a diamond larger than the one she had left behind. He did not buy a full-page apology in a newspaper. He did not arrive at Maple Street Library with reporters, photographers, or a check so large it would turn forgiveness into another transaction. For once, he let silence do what money could not. He let it show him the shape of what he had damaged. Kingsley Capital survived the scandal. Victor Hale was suspended pending independent investigation, his approval codes frozen, his hidden vendor network placed under review, and the board members who had nearly handed him power now spoke in careful statements about transparency and trust. The news cycle corrected itself with the same speed it had condemned Harper. The same strangers who had called her a climber began calling her brave. The same sites that mocked the library as a poor girl's background now praised it as the heart of the story. Harper read almost none of it. At Maple Street Library, children still needed help with homework. The heater still groaned when the temperature dropped below 40 degrees. The rain had left water stains near the children's corner that no flattering headline could erase. Harper returned to ordinary work with a steadiness that looked like healing from a distance and survival up close. She shelved books. She answered donor emails. She taped a new sign over the front desk that said quiet voices, brave hearts. Some afternoons, when the library emptied and the late sun hit the floorboards, she would reach for her notebook and stop, realizing she no longer knew whether she was recording evidence or memories. On the 11th morning, a soft rain fell over Queens, the kind that made the sidewalk shine without chasing people indoors. Harper arrived early, balancing a paper bag of bagels and her keys in one hand. She stopped before she reached the door. Nate Kingsley was kneeling beneath the old green awning with a screwdriver, trying to reattach the crooked wooden sign that read Maple Street Library. He wore dark jeans, a simple gray sweater, and a rain jacket with no visible designer label. His hair was damp. His shoes were practical and already scuffed at the toes. Beside him sat a small toolbox, 2 cups of coffee, and a folded piece of paper weighted down by the engagement ring she had left behind. Harper stood under the rain for a moment, watching the billionaire struggle with a stubborn screw. "You are holding it upside down," she said. Nate looked over his shoulder. A dozen emotions crossed his face, but he chose humility first. "That explains the problem. It does explain one of them." He lowered the screwdriver slowly and stood, careful not to step too close. "Good morning, Harper." The sound of her name in his voice was almost enough to undo her. Almost. She walked to the awning and looked at the sign, then at the coffee. "Is this a repair or a strategy?" "A repair. Poorly executed." "And the coffee?" "An apology to the person who will probably have to fix the repair after I leave." She wanted not to smile. The corner of her mouth betrayed her. Nate saw it, but he did not claim it as victory. That was new. He picked up the folded paper from beside the ring and held it out. "I wrote this because you were right. Some truths are safer on paper, especially when the person speaking has used too many polished words in his life." Harper looked at the letter but did not take it yet. "Nate, if this is about gratitude, it is not." His voice was quiet. "You saved my company. That is true, but I am not here because of the company." "Then why are you here?" He looked through the front window at the shelves, the children's drawings, the reading corner where his coat had once covered a shivering boy. "Because the first time I asked you to stand beside me, I asked you to stand beside my name, my board, my family clause, my crisis. I made your courage serve my fear and called it an agreement." Rain tapped lightly on the awning above them. Harper's grip tightened around the bag of bagels. Nate placed the torn contract on the small outdoor table beside the coffee. It had been ripped cleanly in half. The legal language split down the center, 6 months and separate rooms and public appearances reduced to paper that no longer had power over either of them. Next to it, he set the ring. Not on silk, not in a velvet box. Just there, in the gray morning, ordinary and waiting. "The library trust remains protected," he said. "No matter what you say. The repairs are funded. Not by me personally, not as a favor, and not under my control. The independent board you requested has full authority. Your mother's library is safe from my pride." Harper's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. "You finally learned how not to make rescue look like ownership." He nodded. "I am still learning." Then he held out the letter again. This time she took it. His handwriting was careful, uneven in places, human in a way his contracts had never been. There was only one sentence in the center of the page. "Will you choose me when I am no longer hiding behind my name?" Harper closed her eyes. For a moment, she was back in the penthouse, writing evidence beneath city lights. Back in the Astoria ballroom, standing before people who had mistaken her poverty for motive. Back in the storm, watching Nate give his coat to a child when no camera was supposed to matter. When she opened her eyes, he was not reaching for her. He was waiting. That was the difference. "I will not be your proof of stability," she said. "I know. I will not be your redemption story for the board. I know. And if I choose you, it will not be because you were wrong and now you are sorry." Nate's voice softened. "Then why would you choose me?" Harper looked at the crooked sign, the torn contract, the ring, and the man who had finally come to her world without trying to buy it. "Because you came back with empty hands and learned how to hold the truth." She picked up the ring and slid it onto her finger herself. Not as a performance, not as a bargain, as a decision. Months later, their wedding took place inside Maple Street Library, between rows of old books and paper lanterns made by the children after school. Eleanor Kingsley cried openly in the front row. Maya Collins smiled with the tired satisfaction of someone who had watched justice arrive in paperwork and love arrive in patience. Miguel carried the rings with great seriousness, while Sophie whispered loudly that Nate's shoes were much better this time. There were no champagne towers, no board members calculating optics, no public relations team adjusting Harper's smile. Only warm light, rain tapping gently against the windows, and vows spoken in a room that understood both of them. Victor Hale's name appeared one final time in the business section, attached to the investigation that ended his career and exposed the quiet machinery he had built behind polished doors. Harper did not read the article until the next morning. That night, she was dancing slowly with Nate in the reading corner, beneath the crooked sign he had finally fixed, realizing that the evidence she hid had saved his company, but the truth it revealed had saved something far more fragile, the man behind the name, and the love that could only begin after the contract ended.